So in today's video, we are going to be discussing Amari Cooper being traded to the Cleveland Browns. Now, before we get into the video, please consider liking and subscribing, and let's get right into the video. Now, obviously, we are here to discuss Amari Cooper getting traded to the Browns. Now, for me personally, when I heard this news, I didn't think much of it when it came to the standpoint of Amari Cooper. Like, I know that sounds really weird coming from a perspective where the guy getting traded, and I really don't have an opinion really on Amari Cooper himself. We know what Amari Cooper is. He's a very, very productive wide receiver. Now, his time in Dallas this year, he did have kind of a down year. It wasn't an Amari Cooper-esque season that he had. It didn't reach 1,000 yards, but he has more with 1,000-yard receiving seasons. So we know what Amari Cooper is made of. We know what Amari Cooper can do. So the production standpoint of Amari Cooper doesn't really concern me any. Like, we know what he is. He's a great wide receiver. Like, there were stats floating around that since he joined the Dallas Cowboys, he's been a top 10 wide receiver in a lot of the important categories. So Amari Cooper as a whole, him being traded I don't really have an opinion on that. I think if we're looking at just a talent standpoint, I think it's a great pickup for the Browns. But what I do think this trade means for the Browns is a huge indictment on Baker Mayfield. And I know it's a bash on Baker. Everybody loves to do it. Now, look, personally, I don't think Baker Mayfield is in that top echelon of quarterbacks in the NFL. I really do not see it. I don't think he performs on a consistent basis, and I don't think he's done enough in his career yet to be considered one of those top quarterbacks in the NFL. Now, I will give him credit where credit's due. He helped the Browns win their first playoff game since the 90s. So there's always that Baker will have going for him. He was a first overall pick. He's been through multiple head coaches in the NFL, and he finally landed a head coach in Kevin Stefanski, who's really good. But that also begs the question, is it Kevin Stefanski or is it Baker Mayfield? So there's a lot of questions that revolve around Baker Mayfield that are constantly evolving and constantly coming up every single day. But back to the news of Amari Cooper getting traded to the Browns. In a way, I feel bad for Amari Cooper. Just the beginning of this week, he was likely going to get released by the Dallas Cowboys. There was a very good chance. It seemed like it. There was a lot of rumblings. Maybe it was just fans talking, but it really did seem like Amari Cooper could go to the Chiefs and play with Patrick Mahomes, which would have been a huge pickup for the Chiefs. And Amari Cooper playing with the best quarterback in the NFL right now, just best quarterback in the NFL, period. It doesn't matter right now. I think it would have helped. The Chiefs offense would have elevated Amari Cooper to a level that maybe we haven't seen him before. And he went from all those possibilities to now having to play with Baker Mayfield. Now, obviously, I was mentioning all the things that Baker Mayfield has done, but the expectations are high with him. He was the number 1 overall pick in the NFL draft. And like I said, he got them to the playoffs, and he got them their first playoff win, as I said, since the 90s. And people have been scapegoating him for this past season, but again, a scapegoat has to be blaming on somebody for the failures of a team. So scapegoating, I don't know if that's the right word or if the blame should be put squarely on Baker Mayfield's shoulders, because everything around that entire Browns team was set up to succeed. I really personally did believe that everything was set up for the Browns to succeed last season. That they were just in the playoffs. They just won a playoff game. They did it with the majority of their roster and still intact, and it turned out that wasn't the case at all. And I know Baker was injured, but you can only use that injury so much because he was injured since, I believe, he was injured in week 2. So if you're injured in week 2 and you play throughout the entire season, I don't think it's really there's really not much that you can do other than really blame the quarterback who's playing, because you know the injury that you're playing through. If it's really hindering you that much where you're not able to perform, I understand being out on the field. You have to do it. But if you're struggling that bad on the field and not producing like you want to, having a losing record, yes, it's a tough division, but missing the playoffs, you should just sit the year out and then come back when you're healthy and then play the next season. Hopefully that will be the bet on yourself season, which Baker Mayfield did last year, and it didn't work out for him because right now he's looking for that long-term extension. And after the way last season played out, it's not going to go well, and he's not going to get that extension. So you have the injury situation, but then you also have the issues with Odell Beckham Jr., where those two were basically oil and water. They did not mix together. They were a terrible combo of quarterback wide receiver. They did not work out for a single moment while OBJ was in Cleveland. Yes, you know, Baker was hurt, Odell Beckham was hurt. Like, there was things out of their control where they maybe didn't play as much as they could have, but when they were on the field, it was a complete disaster. So much that it led to Odell Beckham's dad releasing a video of Baker not getting him the ball, and that just led all these spirals down to OBJ not really wanting to be there anymore, and then him getting released by the Browns. And then he eventually ended up with the Rams, where he then thrived and won the Super Bowl. So then you have all of that with Baker Mayfield, and that's just this past season. And then you also have the reports that Baker had issues with Kevin Stefanski, their head coach. Now, this stems to, I believe, the game against Pittsburgh, where Kevin Stefanski's play calling, that one I can fully understand. Like, the play calling in that game, I remember that vividly. I think that game was a mess for the Browns. I think it was Big Ben's final home game, but it was a mess for the Browns. Like, they should have been running the ball with Nick Chubb. It looked like they forgot that they had a running back on their roster in that game. So I understand in a sense those complaints. But again, I mean, for as much hype as Baker wants to give himself, you kind of have to, even if you are in that bad situation, you got to produce a little bit more than what you did in that game, even if the play calling was kind of iffy, which I agree was bad. But then there's also the aspect where he wants to be paid like a top quarterback, but he doesn't want to be in situations like a top quarterback. So you also have that going. So what does this mean for Amari Cooper? And as I mentioned earlier, I don't think it means really much for Amari Cooper. We know what Amari Cooper is. And I know that it was a spiel about Baker Mayfield, but that's all I could think about when it came to this, because Baker Mayfield has had Jarvis Landry and Odell Beckham Jr. all on the same team at the same time. Two great weapons, great offensive line, elite level running backs, everything around him to succeed. And the only thing they have to show for it, as hard as it is to win the NFL, the expectations are very high though for the Browns. All he has to show for it is the one playoff win against Pittsburgh. And he doesn't have anything else to show for it. In a season like they had last year, and going into last year where they were considered a Super Bowl favorite, for it to end with them not even making the playoffs, it's a complete disaster. So I think this trade is just more about Baker Mayfield in my eyes. I could be completely wrong, because for Amari Cooper were scapegoated in Dallas, because I was reading an article that the NFL Network or NFL.com posted about the issues that Jerry Jones had with Amari Cooper throughout the season, and in my eyes they were actually scapegoating Amari Cooper for the season, because Cooper, I think, was out of game because he had COVID issues. And Jerry Jones, obviously, as a team, you're frustrated. Look at the Colts, like, they're scapegoating Carson Wentz. He was terrible last year with the Colts in situations where it really, really mattered, so the Colts were mad. Like, the Colts are so mad that they literally don't have a quarterback on their roster right now. And that's kind of seems like like every year a team that doesn't succeed, somebody's always getting scapegoated. And in this situation, it was Amari Cooper. And I don't think that's necessarily fair for Amari Cooper, because I think when it comes to Dallas, I think their head coach that play call is an absolute disaster. People to this day are actually trying to defend it and say it was executed poorly, but there were so many things in that situation that I think could go wrong then can help your team succeed. 14 seconds left, you run a play where no matter what, the only way to stop the clock is by spiking the ball. I really don't think there's any way to defend that play call. I don't even think that play call should have been even in consideration at that time. No matter how many times you executed it in practice, that play call should have never been called. You had 14 seconds left, utilize the sidelines. I know San Francisco, whatever, they were defending the sidelines, but you got to be better in that situation. You have to that run by Dak Prescott can't be the best play that you have drawn up in that situation. So I don't think Amari Cooper getting scapegoated for this season is particularly fair. There's many reasons why you could scapegoat Dallas, or you could have issues with Dallas, but scapegoating Amari Cooper is not one of them. And because of all this, you now have Jarvis Landry, who himself is allowed to, through all this, you also have the side details that Jarvis Landry is also allowed to seek permission, or he seek permission from the Browns to seek a trade. So even if Amari Cooper, once he does come into the Browns, he's going to be really the only wide receiver on that team. And so he's going to be wide receiver one once he does finally get to the Browns. So finally, what does this mean for both Amari Cooper and Baker Mayfield? I think there are two pretty logical outcomes, at least in my mind, that I could think of when I was first thinking of this story. It's going to work either really well for these guys. Both of them were scapegoated in their current situations, albeit Baker is still on their team. And you have Amari Cooper, who was, in a way, ran out of Dallas. They were going to release him, but then they traded him. He was kind of ran out of Dallas. For some reason, he was the guy that everybody picked to put the blame on, even though there's, again, multitude. You have the coaches to blame, but you also have Jerry Jones himself to blame for paying Ezekiel Elliott so much that they would rather give up Amari Cooper over Zeke Elliott, which makes absolutely no sense, because if I don't understand the cap. I've mentioned that a million times, but if I was Jerry Jones, I would release or get rid of Zeke Elliott way before I got rid of Amari Cooper, because running backs are a dying breed, and you don't really have those running backs that, that are just, the Derrick Henry types are very, very rare. You can always have like a Christian McCaffrey who can do both, but the breed of just a pure running back like Derrick Henry, it's gone. And then you have head coaches like Kyle Shanahan, where literally they could plug me in and I could probably average 3 yards a carry, 4 yards a carry. So the running back position is a dying breed. So that's a possible situation. Both of those guys being blamed for their current situation, so it could work out well. But you also have the other situation where it's just going to be an Odell Beckham Jr., Baker Mayfield situation all over again. It's going to be OBJ versus Baker part 2. That's also the other outcome. So I really do think there's only two outcomes that can happen from this trade, and how the Browns are going to be able to, it's either going to work or it's not. And I know that sounds pretty lame, but it's either going to be two guys coming out with fire, both of them kind of being blamed, and albeit Baker Mayfield still on his team, or it's simply not going to work. It's going to flame out, and neither guy is really going to be happy, and it's going to be a bad situation all around. And then you're left with the Browns organization as a whole, who are then left in a complete mess. So those are my thoughts on Amari Cooper being traded to the Browns. Again, I don't really have much of an opinion on Amari Cooper himself. I think a lot of this, again, when anything happens to the Browns, especially on the offense, when it comes to wide receivers, I think most people will agree that they think of Baker Mayfield first before they think of the actual wide receiver. If it was a Davante Adams type, I still think people would talk about Baker Mayfield, because they're going to talk about how Baker Mayfield is not going to even be able to get Davante Adams the ball. Like, you get what I'm getting at. But that was me discussing Amari Cooper traded to the Browns. Leave me your thoughts down below, and I'll see you in the next one.